The homeowners association thought they were clever when they tried to intimidate one of their residents by digging a massive trench around his property. They believed they had the upper hand, that no one would dare to challenge their authority. But what they didn't know was that every move they made was being recorded, because this homeowner had hidden cameras placed in strategic spots. And when the truth came out, the whole situation turned against the HOA in ways they never imagined. From the very beginning, this homeowner had a tense relationship with his HOA. Unlike many others, he wasn't the kind of person who bowed down to unnecessary rules or tolerated unfair treatment. He lived in his home for years, maintained it well, paid his dues on time, and followed the necessary guidelines. But the HOA board always seemed to have a problem with him. They complained about the most minor things, like the color of his fence, the length of his grass, and even the type of vehicles parked on his driveway. He never gave them a legitimate reason to fine him or threaten him, but they still made his life difficult at every turn. Over time, their actions became less about enforcing community standards and more about intimidation and control. And this homeowner knew it. The tension escalated after a series of heated meetings where he openly challenged the board's decisions. He wasn't rude or disruptive, but he refused to accept unfair treatment. That was enough to put a target on his back. The HOA board began plotting ways to teach him a lesson. And then came the shocking incident. The trench. Without warning, without any official notice, the HOA arranged for workers to come onto his property line. They dug a long, deep trench surrounding the edges of his yard, creating not just an inconvenience, but a serious hazard. It was wide enough and deep enough to make it nearly impossible for him to drive his vehicle in or out. It felt less like a maintenance project and more like a siege tactic. Neighbors were stunned. They whispered among themselves, wondering why the HOA had gone this far. Some speculated it was about property improvements, but anyone who knew the backstory understood exactly what was happening. This was intimidation, pure and simple. But what the HOA didn't count on was the homeowner's foresight. Months before, after noticing small acts of harassment, like misplaced violation notices, mysterious damage to his mailbox, and late-night disturbances, he had quietly installed a network of hidden cameras around his home. These weren't obvious, front-door security cameras. They were subtle, tucked into corners, disguised near landscaping, and strategically placed to capture angles that no one would suspect. When the trench project began, every single moment was caught on camera. The trucks rolling in, the workers breaking ground, the HOA representatives overseeing the digging. It was all there, recorded with timestamps and clear evidence. The homeowner stayed calm. He didn't rush outside screaming or cause a scene. Instead, he let the cameras do the work. He watched silently, knowing he had just been handed undeniable proof of the HOA's overreach. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. When he confronted the HOA board about the trench, they tried to spin the narrative. They claimed it was part of a community drainage improvement project, and that his property happened to fall within the designated zone. They acted as though it was coincidental, nothing personal. But he knew better. He asked for official permits, documentation, and prior notices. They had none. Their story fell apart the moment he asked for proof. Still, they underestimated him. They thought he would be intimidated into silence. What they didn't realize was that he had evidence strong enough to challenge not just their explanation, but their entire credibility. So, he prepared. He gathered the footage from his cameras and organized it chronologically. He included clips showing HOA board members pointing and directing workers specifically around his property. He compiled audio snippets of their comments, remarks that revealed the true intent behind the project. It wasn't about drainage. It wasn't about safety. It was targeted harassment, plain and simple. The homeowner took this evidence to legal counsel. The attorney immediately recognized the strength of the case. Not only was the trench an act of trespassing and property damage, but the footage exposed a deliberate campaign of intimidation by the HOA board. It crossed far beyond the boundaries of their authority. When word of his legal action spread, the neighborhood began buzzing. Other residents, who had silently endured the HOA's unreasonable demands, started paying attention. Many came forward with their own stories. Excessive fines, unexplained fees, harassment letters. The trench incident became a tipping point. The HOA board, once feared and unquestioned, now found itself cornered. As the legal case progressed, the board grew desperate. They tried to downplay the incident, insisting the trench was a miscommunication. But the footage didn't lie. The homeowner's cameras captured not only the act itself, but also the intent behind it. When the case finally reached the courtroom, the evidence spoke louder than any argument. The judge was appalled at the blatant abuse of power. The trench wasn't just a nuisance. It was a dangerous, retaliatory move that put the homeowner at risk and violated his property rights. The ruling came down hard against the HOA. They were ordered to fill the trench, repair the damages, and cover all legal fees. But the consequences didn't stop there. Several board members faced personal liability for their actions. Their positions on the board were challenged, and some were forced to resign under community pressure. The homeowner didn't just win his case, he set a precedent. His decision to quietly install hidden cameras turned the tables completely. What the HOA thought would be an act of power and control became their downfall. After the case, the community began to change. Residents who once felt powerless found their voices. The HOA, stripped of its intimidation tactics, had no choice but to operate transparently and fairly. The trench that was meant to isolate and scare one man ended up uniting the entire neighborhood against corruption. And the homeowner? He carried himself with quiet satisfaction. He didn't boast or rub the victory in anyone's face. He simply went back to his life, his home now free from harassment, knowing he had stood his ground. In the end, the HOA learned a harsh lesson. Intimidation doesn't work when the truth is recorded. And sometimes, the smallest hidden cameras can shine the brightest light on corruption.